So in the beginning, back at least the beginning for me was the early 90s, there was business intelligence, as we just talked about. And I would say within a decade, it became synonymous with reporting and more specifically with dashboarding. That's what people kind of think of it now when they use that term. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I wrote a book on dashboards in 2005 and a second edition in 2010. So I was kind of in the middle of that whole phenomenon of business intelligence when I worked at the Data Warehousing Institute. But more recently, BI has come under assault, I would say, a little bit. Last year, ThoughtSpot started to market this campaign that dashboards are dead, provoked a lot of interesting commentary. And I, of course, didn't quite agree with that, but I might be biased. But over the years, people have been quick to point out business intelligence limitations. So we think of BI not as the global umbrella for things that use data to make your business more intelligent, but more as the reporting side of that whole equation. You know, people have pointed out that BI is too reactive. You know, it's only looking at past results. It's too generalized. You're only getting the top level summary of information and the devil's in the details. It's too manual to put together as well as to interpret. And it's too descriptive. In other words, it's not analytical enough. It's not predictive enough. It's too inflexible. You know, someone has to define up front what the metrics are that you're going to measure. What are the thresholds that color code performance? Too hard to use, especially for what I would call casual users or regular business users, people who aren't hired to crunch data on a day-to-day basis. And probably the biggest complaint that I've heard is that it doesn't turn insights into action. So people have been saying that BI has a last mile problem. And as a result, they're questioning what is the value that we're really getting out of these reporting tools. We're spending a lot of money on them still today, but are we getting a lot of value? Are we getting not just insights, but are we getting actions based on those insights? And can we measure those actions? And are they moving the needle for our organization? So I think that's the big question. And I think a lot of BI vendors out there wrestle with this. If they're not Power BI or Tableau, they face this situation a lot. What value do we bring to our customers? How can we help them justify the expenditures on these tools so that they continue to do business with us or make room for us in their BI portfolio? And as a result, we're seeing, this is jumping ahead a little bit, just from a product perspective, that vendors who are not Tableau or Power BI are kind of taking one of two approaches. They're either going very broad and focusing about something called decision intelligence, which is kind of putting everything in the kitchen sink into their platform, from reporting to dashboarding to everything up to predictive analytics, and also some AI to help close that gap between data and actions. Or they're drilling down into analyst-specific tools to really move the needle on self-service. And making our power users, especially our data analysts, much more productive and collaborative. So we'll talk about those two trends. So Eckerson Group, TDWI, where I used to work, and BARC, which is a big partner of ours in Germany, we've all done these surveys to try to track the adoption of BI in enterprises, and we always come up with the same results, that on average, the BI tools are used by about 20 to 25% of employees, and that figure has not budged in the last 10, 15 years, really. And people have always scratching their heads. BI vendors are scratching their heads. Even BI managers sometimes, they bring tools in and expect immediate adoption, especially as the tools get easier to use and they're all self-service. But still, there's still a lot of shelfware. So, what does this mean? And I kind of ask a contrary question, which is this really a problem? Because to me, the BI market is not just one market, it's actually 4 markets. And I've had this framework for who are the users of BI tools or analytics tools for many, many years. That's why it kind of looks a little bit dated here, the graphics. But I kind of see that there's 2 major categories of users. And within those categories, there's 2 subsets. And these really define the market for BI and why I think some vendors have difficulty addressing it. And as you can see here, that data consumers, and those are folks who are just essentially viewing dashboards and reports. Those are executives and frontline workers, frankly, as well as customers and suppliers to some extent. And they're the vast majority of the consumers of BI. And a lot of times those folks aren't counted in surveys that we do. And in fact, a lot of times those folks don't even know they're using BI because they're looking at an embedded visualization inside of another application, a portal or an ERP or a CRM application. And to them, that really doesn't count as BI. There are also data explorers, and these are data consumers who actually want to do more with the data. They want to dig into it a little bit more. They want to open up a dashboard and modify it, maybe even create their own dashboard or add their own Excel data to it. So they want to enrich reports. That's about 30% of your employees, and that's actually the fastest growing group. As people graduating from college get more data literate and tool literate, analytics literate, I think we'll see the explorers poach more and more of the consumers. Now, these folks don't do self-service, in my opinion. They're doing silver service, which means they really want data served up to them on a silver platter in the form that they want and can use immediately. They really don't want to do a lot of hard work because, frankly, they're not getting paid to be analysts, right? So they're not getting paid and not being hired to be power users like the data analysts and data scientists below. Those are the folks who, in my estimation, really need self-service tools. And by that, I mean the ability to create stuff from scratch. Go out and find data, go out and pull it together, prepare it, modify it, clean it, visualize it, analyze it, share it, and publish it. And data scientists, 2% of your employees, they obviously are much more academically trained. They're the ones who are using ML and AI to create predictive models and discover patterns in large volumes of data. So when I look at the market, we're seeing a lot of tools and functionality that are geared to these different types of users, or should be geared to these different types of users, but vendors kind of have a blunt instrument when they market, and they tend to provide tools for everybody because they don't want to short shrift their revenue stream, right? But in reality, a lot of times they're pitching power user tools to business users, which is what causes a lot of the shelfware that I talked about earlier. So if they, to me, what do data consumers really need? Well, they need those interactive dashboards that contain just the metrics that they're responsible for, and the ability to drill down and drill across and see performance of themselves or their unit. Especially if they're frontline workers or even customers and suppliers, they want embedded analytics. And that market, from a vendor perspective, has exploded. Vendors see that as a whole new outlet for their products and tools. And a number of vendors have converted from selling, retail BI to embedded BI. Logi Analytics was one, and more recently, Sisense has focused 100% now on embedded analytics. And now, of course, with the advent of ChatGPT, you have to ask, is that going to replace all the tools that we already have? for data consumers and maybe even everyone else as well. It's as you probably all looked at, it's an incredibly powerful tool. It's conversational. It remembers the questions you asked prior. It's fast. It gets it right most of the time. And, people have told me that version 4 is going to be miles above what we're seeing today. And I can't imagine what the impact is going to be. So we'll talk a little bit more about ChatGPT in a second. So for these data explorers, they need to do some ad hoc stuff, right? So this notion of natural language queries where you can type words into a search bar and generate SQL behind the scenes, which returns an answer and displays it as a chart or a table, and you can keep iterating. As long as someone has built a nice model behind the scenes, that can work pretty well. So ThoughtSpot, they came out of the gate doing this, right? Made a big name for themselves, being the Google of BI. We're going to simplify BI so everyone can use it. Well, it's never as easy as anyone makes out. The number 2 here is something that's been around for a long time. That's the ability, if you see a dashboard, there should be a big button up in the top right or somewhere that if you have the right permissions, you can click that button and you can open up the model behind the dashboard and begin to modify it, right? So you can add dimensions that weren't added into the dashboard, but were in the model that powers it. You can perhaps combine columns. You can do your own calculations and things like that. Maybe even add your own spreadsheet data to it. So that's something that these explorers want to do. So those are like managers who are very data driven and want to get a little bit more detail than what's available in the canned report or dashboard. And then there's this third thing that you've probably seen. I call it assisted analytics. That's where you get a dashboard, and if you put your cursor on a number or a chart, behind the scenes, there's an algorithm that runs against the data powering that dashboard, and it will work on and calculate correlations, things that are hidden in the data behind, below the level of the dashboard that you may not have considered or thought about looking at. And those products, I don't know how well used they are, frankly, from the conversations I've had. Not that many people use them, but for a data explorer, it's something that would help them instead of them having to do an edit, right, of a dashboard or report. They could play around with that assisted analytics button and see what the tool automatically generates for insights and correlations that might be worth looking at. But I think where the real market is today, and a lot of the innovation is tools for these data analysts. And to me, when we do consulting, I always try to find out, who are the data analysts in the organization, because they're kind of spread across all the departments and functional areas. And they're kind of the linchpin for an analytics data and analytics strategy, because they've got one foot in the business and one foot in data and technology. They're the quintessential purple people, as we used to call them at TDWI, not totally in the business, not totally in IT. They're a blend of both. And they can really make or break your whole data and analytics strategy. So it really behooves us to pay attention to them. One, find out who the heck they are, because a lot of companies don't even know. And they have no idea how much they're spending on them, which is usually millions more than they would ever guess. Because these are the folks who are actually trying to make data work in the trenches, right? Trying to help department heads use data to answer questions they have. Usually it's ad hoc questions. But they're overwhelmed because to generate a decent insight oftentimes means lots of operational work. Finding data, cleaning it, blending it, just way too much work. So they spend 80% of their time fixing data and 20% analyzing it. So there's a huge opportunity, and it's been there for decades, to really empower these folks And we're starting to see some tools that really make progress. So one is business monitoring, and I'll drill into that. It's kind of a turbocharged version of the assisted analytics that I talked about earlier. There's an analytics workbench, which try to pull in all the capabilities that a data analyst would need to support their end-to-end workflow. And collaborative intelligence is an extension of that, which essentially says, analysts, you're all isolated, you're all reinventing the wheel. Let's create one platform that you can all use together, follow each other, reuse components that you've built and workflows you've built, and allow administrators or super users to define things once, standardize where they are placed, and have everyone use them, right? And that alone would increase the productivity of this group of folks tremendously. So I'm pretty excited about some of the products we're seeing down there. And then finally, data scientists, they're in a whole category by themselves. They also have workbenches from Data IQ and companies like that to kind of coordinate their activities across the enterprise. These big cloud data platforms are increasingly catering to data scientists, including functions and stored procedures that can kick off machine learning functions, providing zones or discovery zones inside their platform, so they don't have to download all this data to their desktop. They can actually do their work and train their models on a very robust processing environment, where all the data already exists, right? And then finally, the hardest part, we've verified this in our own consulting, is actually deploying these models, creating pipelines that will actually distribute the data to the models in real time, embedded inside applications. And that whole process of productionizing models and maintaining the quality and the accuracy of the output is tremendously difficult. And there's this whole, I guess, discipline that I'm just calling ML ops that's involved in doing that. So Neil, if there are any questions that you think are relevant, just stop me and insert them here, because I really can't do that.
There's a few coming down. So how do you categorize employee usage was a question. I think you may have addressed that already in here, or maybe not.
Yeah, I think for the surveys we tried to, I know the last round we did with Bark, we tried to include the embedded usage, but it still came out to 20%. But yeah, it's across all employees. That's the percentage that we're tracking. How many are using BI in an active way?
That's it. I don't think there's many others. I'm not sure that was from Nathan. He was talking about people who don't view reports or dashboards. So I guess there are other types of consumers nowadays.
Yeah.
Because warehouses have shifted from being just a reporting center to a data feed as well for downstream consumers as well.
Right.
Yeah. So not much else in there at the moment. Anyone else please add things? Will the Power BI and Tableau model become passé was a question as well. Good question.
Yeah, some people are saying that the whole market's become commoditized. You look at all the layoffs from Salesforce, a lot of them were Tableau folks.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't quite bode well. I think BI has to move beyond and add more value. As I said earlier, it has to close that last mile, or really improve the productivity of your data analysts and data scientists to be worth the investment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, from a pricing perspective, Power BI comes almost for free. So it's very easy to pick up and use. So it's hard to compete with that, just from a market perspective.
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with that. And there's another one from Chris, which I think is a good one as well, which is, is a warehouse analytic, or is it integrating operational data feeds, or is it both? Are we converging to where we have a sort of dual function of a warehouse? It's no longer just reporting, it's also part of the operational data feeds.
It's always been a data hub of sorts. I mean, obviously it's designed to support analytics, right?
Yes, yes.
But, going back decades, I always remember every company I went into, people were taking exports of the data warehouse and even real-time feeds to populate operational applications. So
Yeah,
it's always been a hub of sorts on its own. Although I just got off the phone with Roche Pharmaceuticals, and some of you guys probably know that company, and they've made a very public move to the data mesh. And we had a one-on-one with the head of data warehousing, or I'm not sure what his title is, but he's part of the data team. And the whole mesh thing is very interesting. And they're implementing a mesh using Snowflake, which is a centralized data platform, but it works, as to support the mesh in a decentralized way. But the last question we asked him was, all right, so what's happening to your data warehouse and your data lake? Are you keeping that? And he gave me kind of a mixed answer. He said, well, we're migrating our Oracle on-prem data warehouse to the cloud. But yes, the goal is to have all the data domains building out our mesh to ingest their own operational data and make that available as data products so that we don't need a data warehouse anymore. Now, that actually would be an interesting conversation for this group. And maybe we have another webinar on that topic alone, because it's very interesting. There are a lot of problems with the data mesh, and it's probably going to crash and burn. That's always been my prediction. And my conversation with this really nice fellow there, confirmed that. Yet at the same time, they're getting some real benefits out of it, and they've gotten IT out of the way of what users need to do and want to do with their data. So, all right. So I don't even know how I got on that topic.
That's absolutely fine. I think it's a natural consequence of what the question was. I think I fully agree with you. We did actually have Paul Rankin from.
Oh yeah, Paul.
Yeah. Okay, he came in a couple of sessions ago to present, but if he's moved on a bit, we need to drag him back in again to talk more.
Yeah, well, he's learning a lot. That's exactly what I just got off the phone with. And
oh, wonderful. It's an interest. I agree. Mesh is an interesting thing, and I hope that the industry learns from mesh, takes the best bits out, and moves forward, because it's got a lot of good intentions in there.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But it certainly has implications for the warehouse, right? And
that's
what
right.
You guys all do with your data vault model. So interesting.
Okay. So back to you again. There's run out of questions. Others, please enter more questions if you have any, and we'll carry on.
So, we talk about business intelligence, and it's not going away. It's actually the foundation for everything that we do. As you can see from this diagram here, there are 3 areas of intelligence, at least in my estimation. And, the business intelligence was the IT-driven era that started in 1990 and went roughly to 2005. And then the self-service intelligence era began, and that's gone for 15 years. And now we're into the model-driven era, where we're using ML and AI extensively. But none of these go away. None of them supplant the other. They all actually build on each other. And as you move up this food chain here, the benefits start increasing. As you can see from down below, we go, the focus moves from past to present to future. Reports are moving from IT generated to business generated to machine generated. Analysis goes from intuition driven, hypothesis driven to model driven. Actions from reactive to proactive to automated, and the impact is neutral to positive to absolutely game changing. There are things you need to master at each of these levels. Now, every organization goes through this orbit in different ways and at different paces. But from my perspective, these are the keys that you need to master in each of these eras or stages of maturity in your data and analytics journey. So in the business intelligence, we really are trying to figure out how to consolidate our data, integrate it, ensure it's clean and trustworthy. We've got standard reference data and master data. And most importantly, from a business perspective, we've got standard KPIs and dashboards to display them. Every company that we consult with still has problems with those. There's still a lot of work to do there. And the self-service era, people think that's a slam dunk, easy, everyone wants to do their own data. But I think we've come to realize that unless you govern your self-service deployments, they become absolute chaotic messes. And you actually can make things worse than before you started with self-service. So you need strong data and report governance. You need data literacy. You need this workbench that's basically self-service tools for your power users. And you need a data refinery. That's basically a warehouse or a lake house or whatever centralized repository you use to store your data, or repositories, where the zones are places where you give users access based on their role and what they're trying to do. So you have, your basic landing zone that no one accesses, really. It's just the raw data. It's permanently stored. Your refined zone, your trusted zone, your formatted zone, your discovery zone, your integration zone. Those are just some of the zones that come to the top of my mind that we used in a recent client engagement. And they were all important. And then, in this last era, it's all about machine learning and AI, creating those robust pipelines and deployment vehicles, which I said was pretty hard. The interesting thing about AI is that we're not only using it to do analysis and prediction for the company, AI is being built into all of our data and analytics tools itself, making those tools much more productive and automated than they were 5-10 years ago. And that's pretty impressive. And that's what's fueling a lot of these new tools for data analysts and data scientists, and even for casual users as well. Kind of a slightly different take on this. Just the evolution of intelligence. We've gone from human intelligence, where actually we're pretty good computers ourselves. We collect data, using our brains. We detect patterns and make decisions based on those. And people call that intuition, right? When we make decisions based on our gut feel. But there's actually a lot of data and pattern detection going on there. And sometimes our intuition is extremely accurate, but other times it can be completely way off the mark. And we just have to be aware of our internal biases that might affect the quality of our decisions. So with BI, now we've introduced machines, and they're doing some of the heavy lifting for us. They're collecting all this data and organizing it, and then summarizing it based on what we think we need. And we look at those summarized data sets or dashboards and make judgments and business decisions. So that's great. Augmented intelligence goes to the next step and uses machines and AI to not only collect the data, but also rummage through it with these very powerful algorithms to understand the patterns, the correlations, the trends, the anomalies, and then suggest possible actions. Then humans look at those suggestions and either adopt them or override them and make a decision. In my opinion, this is the most powerful way that our organizations can make use of AI, is by using the algorithms to augment what we do. And if they're good, and in a lot of cases they are, much better, more accurate, more consistent than humans, we begin to trust them quite a bit. That doesn't mean you should just let them necessarily go on unattended, because bad things can happen, like we saw with the financial crisis of 2008, where people started trusting these models implicitly and didn't see the black swan right in front of them. They didn't know the limitations of those models. So obviously the end goal, and for some people, is completely automated actions, and that can happen in our space. We're certainly trying to do that with autonomous vehicles. We're seeing that with chatbots, and ChatGPT is exemplary of that for sure. Again, you can't trust these things implicitly. I've always said that I would never be the first person. I don't even know if I would ever take an autonomous vehicle and let it drive me around Boston, because I just don't think it would be capable of handling all the different variations. We have really bad traffic patterns here in Boston. And then if you add snow, sleet, hail, I think even it's too much for a machine to handle. But there's going to be instances where it works perfectly fine. All right, so that brings us to ChatGPT 3. I'm sure all of you guys have looked at this, right? And gals. It begs these questions. Will it become the interface for analytics? Will it replace analytical tools? Will it replace data analysts? I mean, what I've seen so far is quite impressive. But you have to remember, it's a language model right now that deals with text, right? So there are some considerations there. I actually just did a podcast with the CEO of SciSense, and they're building to ChatGPT's API. And this extension allows you to convert queries or questions into ChatGPT questions, and converts the answers into tabular format, which it displays in SciSense. And I'm not sure how useful that is at the moment. But you have to believe that every analytical tool, every data tool is going to figure out how to use and benefit from ChatGPT. But there are limitations. I'd love to hear what you guys think too. So as I said, it only works with text right now, not tabular data. It doesn't have DBMS connectors, so you can't really point it at your own data and let it rummage. Although I've heard someone said that they could do that. So wouldn't that be interesting if you could let ChatGPT loose on your own databases and then enable people to ask questions? And maybe they're just more tactical questions. They don't require the joining of data. But then again, ChatGPT can pull data from multiple sources and come up with a coherent response. So we actually don't know the full extent of the power of this tool for our space yet. I think we're still early on. And obviously it doesn't always get things right, because there's a lot of crud out in the internet, and there's a lot of crud in our own databases too. It doesn't visually display anything right now. And I read somewhere that it requires a lot of data to achieve or approximate a reasonable degree of accuracy. Let me stop there. I'd love to see if anyone has some comments on this ChatGPT. Looks like I can't.
One question about visual prompts for ChatGPT are there any visual prompts yet? Don't remember seeing anything there.
I haven't. Does anybody else? Has anyone seen that? I don't think so.
So I'm worried about the integrity of source information. If ChatGPT generates stuff which it then feeds off itself for learning from, there'll be no one creating original content, and it'll end up being self-referential.
That was my initial reaction to the whole thing, that it would just be breathing its own exhaust. But I was told recently that actually that makes it smarter, because the first pass, it gives a reasonable response to your question, right? And then if it gets another try, it will take what it already did and make it much better. I'm like, huh. That's interesting. It's like, I make my research analysts do multiple drafts of reports, right? And each time it gets better. And maybe the same is true with ChatGPT. I mean, this thing is starting to feel like it's got human, blood. So
we have a lot of questions coming in, not all relevant necessarily to the point we're talking about here. But the challenges of getting governance right, because that's probably the hardest part of BI. The technology is the easy bit to solve. It's the governance and political aspects that kill the projects.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yeah. Okay.
what's the alternative to Power BI and client-side ETL in the future as you see it? Could be this.
Client-side ETL. Yeah, well, there's a lot of these data prep tools, and there's a big movement to create citizen data integrators, right? So you don't need IT people to build your pipelines anymore. You can have your regular run-of-the-mill data analysts.
Mm-hmm. There's a few
do
people,
that.
yeah, sorry, there's a few people here wondering that are we building HAL from 2001 here?
We're building what?
HAL, the computer that took over
Oh.
the spaceship.
Yeah, ChatGPT is.
You heard it first here. Wayne said we're building HAL. Okay, I think we've got a few more questions towards the end. If you've got some more slides you want to cover, yeah.
So how much time do we have here?
We've got 10 minutes or so, and then we can take questions at the end, and if necessary, we can take things offline at that point.
All right, it looks like I'm not going to finish here. All right.
But we can overrun. There's no real hard limit. So if you want to spend an extra few minutes, there's no trouble.
Yeah. So one of those tools for power users, I call business monitoring. Some people call it augmented analytics. There's a lot of different names for it, but it kind of it's like these IT monitoring or application monitoring tools we use to manage our infrastructure, but it's actually for business metrics, and it's just releasing these very sophisticated algorithms on your business data, and allowing them to rummage through them on a regular basis and then surface only the things that are really relevant for you as an individual. And I think this holds a lot of promise to improve the productivity of data analysts. So, a dashboard, I always said, if you had 1,000 metrics, that was a good size dashboard, right? 10 metrics, 10 dimensions, 10 hierarchies. And a business monitoring system, it might be evaluating 1 million or more metrics, 100 metrics, 100 dimensions, 10 hierarchies at the minimum, right? But maybe even much, much more. And because it's a machine, it doesn't ever get tired. And you just let it loose on your business data, and it is going to spot and surface the relevant trends, correlations, and anomalies. And basically, it's a modern AI-driven alerting system or surveillance system that is going to be very useful for data analysts to point them in the right direction. It's not going to necessarily do the work for them, although it might, in some cases, spot things that they should have spotted. But in many cases, it's going to help them figure out where to do their analysis and really save them a bunch of time. And the way these things work is you just give it your data and it starts processing it, and it creates a baseline for every metric and combination of metrics, right? So you may have 1 million combinations of metrics and dimensions and time, and it's going to create a baseline for each of those metrics, right? By day, by season, and gradually we'll refine that baseline so that if there's an anomaly, it will detect it very quickly. So let's see here, down, 1, learn metric behavior, 2, detect significant deviations, personalize the alert. So here's the thing, if every deviation you were alerted to it, you would just ignore it, right? And that's what happened to the BI tools back in the early 2000s that started to offer alerts. Everyone just ignored them because they were dumb, right? Now we've got smart alerts. And the next step for these things is to correlate deviations to actually suggest root causes and ideally in the future remediation. So this is going to help us close that chasm, right? The last mile of BI between insights and action. These tools will help do that. So here's an example from Outlier, which I really like this product and this tool. Unfortunately, funny story. They had a deal to be acquired by Twitter, and the deal is going to close, unfortunately, the day before Elon Musk decided to buy Twitter, and then the whole thing fell apart. And the company ran out of money, and I don't even know where the IP is. I asked, because I thought this was a really good tool. You can see here how they, to spot detect anomalies, but they do a lot more than just anomalies. They do correlations and root causes, which are essentially they're correlations that there's a high degree of confidence in. That's really what they determine as a root cause. So you can see here at the bottom here, they've got 3 potential root causes. So the cool thing about this tool is that it used algorithms to personalize the alerts so that you weren't overwhelmed. And it gave you each day a daily briefing book with 3 interesting pieces of data that you probably need to know based on you and things you were interested in. So it's like hiring an army of analysts because it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, makes them 10 times, 100 times more productive, points them in the right direction, separates the signal from the noise, which is what an analyst does. Call it a data surveillance engine. Well, I guess we got a couple more minutes. So another thing we're seeing is tools that kind of pull together all the different capabilities that a data analyst might need to do their job well. And there's a lot of different capabilities as I'm building out this slide here. And we're seeing some tools pull all these together in a coherent way. And one tool I really like is Prometheum. It's kind of a data catalog. That was its heritage. And it uses AI to do natural language search. And underneath the covers, there's a data virtualization capability that federates data across the enterprise. And then once you find your data, you can profile and evaluate it. Then it lets you prepare the data through joining the data, building pipelines and visualizing the data. So it's a complete workbench, very powerful. And it also has got some interesting workflows built in, which I'll talk about in the next slide, which is the collaborative intelligence capability. So you see the workflow in the middle here. And this is, if you put this platform and make it available to all of your data analysts throughout the enterprise, you create a fabric that stitches them all together, right? So now they can start seeing what everyone else is doing and start to perhaps reuse work instead of reinventing the wheel. So the first thing they need is this catalog. And ideally, it's got metrics and queries in there that they can reuse. It allows them to follow each other and rate workflows, share workflows that they build. It allows administrators or authorized super data analysts to build guardrails into the platform so that maybe they're all joining data the same way or handling slowly changing dimensions the same way. And the cool thing is, ideally, they've got workflow that enables business users who have hit the limits of their dashboard, or maybe they're even, junior data analysts, right? And they need data to do their analysis. And how's that happen today? Well, they find a friendly data analyst or a data engineer, and they send an email or create a ticket, right? But it's not a very iterative process. It's not a very transparent process. So some of the new tools like Prometheum does a really good job of building a workflow between business users and data analysts and data engineers so that requests, one, if they're already been asked, they're answered immediately with existing data sets. But if they're not asked, people can then start to have a chat and collaborate more closely with the data analyst to refine the query or the question until they get a satisfactory answer. So I think that's very heartening. All right, we kind of talked about this. If you're not Microsoft and Power BI sales, what do? You either go broad and try to be all things to all people, or you go deep and try and build one of these analyst tools we were just talking about. This is the go broad version. It's got everything in the kitchen sink in it. For any type of user, they're not really differentiating between power users and casual users. Some vendors are marketing or messaging this: Decision Intelligence, Pyramid, Domo, Tellius, and Devo. But most BI tools are heading this way. They're adding all the capabilities, even data science built into a BI tool, data prep built into a BI tool. simulation built into a BI tool. You got to wonder if the BI tool is really capable of handling all of that and whether people would really want to go to a BI tool to do all that.